What is going on, my fellow nerds? OperatorOtter here, and today I'd like to talk about the Black River Miasma Bone Spear Necromancer going into Abattoir of Zir. The power of this build does not come from Black River on its own, but rather its synergy with the new Sacrilegious ring being able to auto-detonate 5 corpses. This version of the build cares very little about the corpse explosion damage. Rather, the power is obtained from the ability to consume 5 corpses per second, high flesh eater, whilst getting multiple ranks to hued flesh. So, let's talk about it. Let's start by discussing the 4 most important factors in a Bone Spear build's performance. The first factor is Bone Storm uptime. Bone Storm gives 20% critical hit chance, and with Bone Spear being a crit-based build, the longer it's up, the better our DPS. It also gives damage reduction and synergizes with the aspect of Shielding Storm to make us near invincible. Therefore, if it's up, we're tanky. If it's down, we might as well be a grape waiting to be swished. This is solved by running Lidless Wall. The cool thing about Lidless Wall is we don't actually have to have the main Bone Storm around us to proc an additional Bone Storm. As long as there's a Bone Storm up, even if it's a lidless proc storm somewhere off in Zimbabwe, we can still proc an additional storm in the future. This means we have 10 seconds to get from pack to pack to keep up permanent Bone Storm. In the rare cases we have 10 seconds without enemies, Bone Storm will usually be off cooldown and we can just recast it. Second is Essence Management. Bone Spear does more damage the higher Essence on cast due to the Ossified Key passive, meaning we want to keep our Essence as high as possible. Third is Flesh Eater uptime. Flesh Eater is a flat 40% multiplier to all of our damage, which is nothing to be slept on. And lastly is Grasping Veins uptime. Grasping Veins gives 20% crit hit chance, allowing us to hit that 90% crit hit chance mark. It also gives a 40% multiplier to our crit damage. So, how do we accomplish all 4 for a build? Let's discuss how the most commonly well-known Bone Spear variant accomplishes this. In this version of the Bone Spear, we run an offensive aspect and a rare wand, aspect of Exposed Flesh in ring 1, Sacrilegious ring is ring 2, and Lidless Wall. Lidless Wall solves the Bone Storm uptime issue. The way this version tackles the Essence Management issue is through Essence on Kill in the Paragon nodes and aspect of Exposed Flesh. It's very good at keeping that Essence high, so that problem's solved. It uses the Sacrilegious ring to keep the Grasping Veins uptime solid throughout the dungeon, and I personally don't believe there is a better way to improve upon that mechanic other than manually casting Corpse Tendrils. The issue with this build is the Flesh Eater uptime. The build tackles this through the use of the Sacrilegious ring by exploding a corpse once every second should you have a top roll of the ring. The issue with this lies in how we cannot create Flesh Eater stacks when Flesh Eater is active. This means that when Flesh Eater becomes inactive, we have to consume 5 new corpses. If we only use the ring to stack Flesh Eater, it will take 5 seconds to reactivate Flesh Eater, and therefore we only have Flesh Eater up 55% of the time, which in my personal opinion is not really a good thing. To solve this, we can manually cast Corpse Explosion to get Flesh Eater up back quickly, but we're not casting Bone Spear, so we're losing DPS, and we're also already casting Decrepify and possibly Corpse Tendrils or a Generator as well. Though the build does tackle each of these factors, I personally believe there is a better way of solving the Flesh Eater uptime factor. There's another variant of Bone Spear known as Omnistorm. This build uses the combination of Osseous Gale and Lidless Wall to create a Bone Storm that can theoretically last forever if the density is high enough. Each individual storm created by Lidless Wall is a new Bone Storm that can consume 8 corpses to elongate Bone Storm's duration. This corpse consumption is immediate, and therefore can instantly re-up Flesh Eater as well as provide a lot of essence dependably through Grim Harvest passive in our skill tree to give 6 essence per corpse consumption. Because of this, we saw Bone Storm uptime, Essence Management, and Flesh Eater uptime. The issue I personally have with this version is the Grasping Veins uptime. It's hard to make use of the aspect of Grasping Veins due to the Bone Storms instantly consuming corpses, which makes casting Corpse Tendrils rather difficult unless the density is high. It also adds another degree of difficulty to the build by forcing the player to manually cast Tendrils to keep the Grasping Veins uptime consistent. As you can see here, the Flesh Eater uptime is immediate and can immediately re-up, but I'm having difficulty casting Corpse Tendrils even from a visible corpse on the ground because Osseous Gale is sucking up the corpses. It doesn't make casting Grasping Veins impossible, especially in strong density, but it just isn't consistent, and we really want consistent uptime on the Grasping Veins. With the standard variant of Bone Spear, we solve Bone Storm uptime, Essence Management, and Corpse Tendrils uptime, but have a rather disappointing Flesh Eater uptime. With Omnistorm, we have Bone Storm uptime, Essence Management, and Flesh Eater uptime, but inadequate Grasping Veins uptime. So can we realistically have a build with strong Bone Storm uptime, 0 Essence issues, near permanent Flesh Eater uptime, and adequate Grasping Veins uptime? Well, this is where I think Black River Miasma shows its strength. As you can see here, the Bone Storm uptime is not an issue. Essence Management is solid, Flesh Eater uptime is near permanent, and Tendrils uptime is strong. Let's discuss how the build is doing this, and then we'll discuss the gear, skills, Paragon, and Vampiric Powers. Black River's unique passive allows Corpse Explosion to detonate up to 4 additional corpses for a total of 5 corpse consumptions on a single Corpse Explosion cast. This pairs, like fine cheese and wine, with the Sacrilegious ring, which will cast a corpse explosion every second, and that corpse explosion will consume 5 corpses every time to instantly proc Flesh Eater and restore 30 essence back on that explosion. Corpse explosion damage is negligible in comparison to Bone Spear damage. I will admit corpse explosion is strong for Helltides, but this build is for Abattoir of Zir. This variant of the build uses Corpse Miasma instead for 3 reasons. First, Miasma is incredible at producing corpses, and because Black River gives +3 ranks to hewed flesh, it now turns a 12% lucky hit chance value into 24% against regular mobs and a whopping 48% against bosses. The Miasma allows incredible corpse production, and suddenly there becomes twice as many corpses as enemies. This surplus of corpses allows for Flesh Eater uptime to be strong and essence management to be solved. Second, Miasma is incredible for proccing Decrepify's ability to lower cooldowns and allow stronger Bone Storm uptime. And finally, because it's a shadow-based skill, we can dip into aspects of the Necromancer that benefit from dealing shadow damage, which we will discuss later. Because we are not using Osseous Gale, this means that we get adequate Grasping Veins uptime through manual cast and the Sacrilegious ring. As seen here, the build does great damage against bosses, but if it is available, you can do a hot swap from Lidless Wall to a focus with essence cost reduction and the Edgemaster aspect to net out more damage against the boss. Additionally, if you are lucky and able to obtain the Grandfather, this is 100% the play versus bosses. Grandfather increases your DPS by a large amount to blow up bosses much faster than using Black River with Lidless or a focus. So if you have Granddaddy Sword, hot swap to it for bosses. Alright, let's discuss the build. For the helm, we'll be running Deathless Visage. This helm is just built for Bone Spear and nets out the most damage, though I will say depending on how mob damage scaling occurs in Abattoir, we may swap to Shaco or Rare Helm with Disobedience, but for now it's unnecessary. For the chest, we're going to run Max Life, Total Armor, damage reduction from Shadow over time afflicted enemies, and damage reduction while fortified with the Shielding Storm aspect. This allows us to be very tanky with strong barrier generation without having to fully opt into defensive stats. For gloves, we'll run Ranks of Bone Spear, crit hit chance, attack speed, and resource on lucky hit with the ossified aspect. It's just a clear and powerful multiplier to a crit-based build, so we're going to run this. For pants, we're going to run Tybalt's Will. These pants give maximum essence, instant essence restore, and 40% damage multiplier when unstoppable, and for 4 seconds after when we're always nearly unstoppable. For boots, we're going to run movement speed, essence cost reduction, ranks to corpse tendrils, and intelligence with the Ghost Walker aspect. With Metamorphosis, this aspect will have 100% uptime, and this build is designed to go full octane. For the weapon, Black River. For the amulet, we want ranks to Avulsion, essence cost reduction, movement speed, and cooldown reduction with the splintering aspect. This nets out the greatest single target damage, and boss damage is the weakest part of the build, so we opt into this to solve this issue. Ossified and Grasping Veins are 2 other great options, but this will net out the most damage potential. For ring 1, we'll be running the Sacrilegious ring. This will auto-detonate our corpses in tandem with Black River to provide Flesh Eater uptime, as well as cast Tendrils to keep our Grasping Veins uptime adequate. For ring 2, we'll run crit hit chance, maximum essence, max life, and resource regeneration with aspect of Grasping Veins. As discussed, Grasping Veins gives 20% crit hit chance and a 40% damage multiplier, which will skyrocket our DPS. And lastly, Lidless Wall. All the stats on this shield are great for Bone Spear and is how we will achieve strong Bone Storm uptime. For our sacrifices, we will sacrifice Skeletal Warriors Defenders to max out resistances, Skeletal Mages Cold for largest damage multiplier, and Iron Golem for largest damage multiplier. Alright, now let's talk about the skill tree. We'll put 1 point into Reap and 1 point into Enhanced Reap. From here, into our core skills, we'll do 1 point into Unliving Energy, 3 points into Imperfectly Balanced, 5 points into Bone Spear, 1 point into Enhanced Bone Spear, and 1 point into Paranormal Bone Spear, with 3 points into Hewed Flesh. Moving down, we'll then put 1 point into Corpse Explosion, 1 point into Enhanced Corpse Explosion, and 1 point into Blighted Corpse Explosion, with 3 points into Grim Harvest and Field by Death, respectively. Moving down, we'll put 3 points into Amplify Damage, and then 1 point into Decrepify, Enhanced Decrepify, and a Horror Decrepify each. Then moving downwards, we're going to put 1 point into Corpse Tendrils, 1 point to Enhanced Corpse Tendrils, 1 point into Plague Corpse Tendrils, 2 points into Reaper's Pursuit, and then 3 points into each Serration, Compound Fracture, Rapid Ossification, and Avulsion. Moving down further, we'll do 3 points into Standalone, 3 points into Memento Mori, 1 point into Bone Storm, Prime Bone Storm, and Supreme Bone Storm. And of course, for our passive, we will run Ossified Essence. Then for our skill bar, we'll be running Bone Spear. This is going to be our main source of damage, obviously. And then Reap. So Reap here is going to give us a good amount of damage reduction and good attack speed. This is really strong against suppressors because we have to enter into the suppressor bubble to deal damage to suppressors, but that puts us into a really dangerous position. So by casting Reap, we actually get a good amount of damage reduction. And then if we kill something, we get that extra attack speed, which allows us to burst through those suppressors faster. So it's really nice. It won't be used a lot throughout the dungeon, but it's really, really good against those suppressors. From there, we got Bonestorm, obviously. Decrepify for cursing things. This is going to give us damage reduction and the cooldown reduction, as well as the Amplify Glyph that we'll talk about in a Paragon. And then we have Corpse Explosion and Corpse Tendrils, respectively, for our Sacrilegious ring, doing our Corpse Explosion with Black River, and then the Tendrils for Aspect of Grasping Veins in tandem with the Sacrilegious ring. All right, let's talk Paragon. So for the first board, we're going to be running Sacrificial. This is going to give us a nice damage multiplier with some armor. Can't complain. Moving on forward, we're going to be doing Scent to Death with Corporeal. So Scent to Death is going to give us some damage reduction when there's corpses nearby. There's going to be a bunch of corpses nearby throughout the dungeon because Miasmas are going to be producing corpses everywhere. So that'll give us a nice damage reduction, which is awesome. And then when we're against the boss, the corpses are going to spawn on the boss, but we're going to be distanced from the boss because that's how Bone Spear works, and we're going to get that damage multiplier. For the Glyph, we're going to be running Corporeal. This is going to give us some armor and damage to injured enemies, as well as a multiplier. I think the Scent to Death board damage to injured enemies thing is kind of a slept-on thing because Bone Spear does less damage for every spear that you cast unless you get that RNG proc for resource because of the Ossify Key Essence. So when you hit that 35% threshold on the boss, being able to have that big spike in damage from the damage to injured enemies is going to be very nice. And then for the third board, we'll be running Bone Graft. Bone Graft is awesome. It gives us essence and it gives us damage. Can't complain. And then from here, we got this maximum essence and essence on kill, which is really important. And we also have Tenacity, which is a very powerful defensive node stat. So we'll be running that as well. And then for the Glyph, we'll be running Essence, which is a crit strike damage glyph on a crit-based build. I mean, I don't know what else to say there. And then you have your Wither with Exploit. So this is where things get a little bit weird. So for the Glyph, we're going to be running Exploit, which is a good one. It's just going to give us that nice damage multiplier with some additive damage, which is good. But this is where things get really cool. So this is the damage reduction from shadow damage over time nodes, which are super strong with this build. And in case you were wondering how we activate that, Miasma is a shadow damage over time ability. So that's how we activate it. When I wasn't running this, I was probably dying once every 2 runs. But now that I'm running it, I probably die once every 10-ish runs, which is really, really nice. So I would suggest giving that a try and see how that works out for you. For fifth board, we'll be running Flesh Eater, which is that nice 40% damage buff for multiplier, can't complain. And then going into here, we'll be running Amplify for now because that's the best one that we can do for T100s. If you're doing Helltide's Exhumation is really, really nice for the Corpse Explosion damage. But for Abattoir of Zir, obviously this is where we will be running our Tears of Blood because this is where we get the largest amount of int. And to activate all of this intelligence that we'll be doing, we'll just be taking out damage mods throughout the board and then just throwing them on here so that we can get the biggest modifier for our Tears of Blood for Abattoir of Zir. Lastly, for our Vampiric Powers, we're going to be running Metamorphosis to keep us unstoppable and provide more movement. We'll then be running Sanguine Brace to provide us damage reduction and crit hit chance. Prey of the Weak for a strong multiplier to our damage. Ravenous for more attack speed to increase our DPS. And Anticipation to keep our Bone Storm cooldown low. And that's the build. What are your thoughts? For me, depending on how much damage the new glyph gives us in tandem with the mob's damage scaling, Omnistorm might be the play, in that it's more tanky than Black River Miasma. But if the mob damage isn't an issue and we can survive just fine, then I think Black River Miasma may be the best pick. At this point, it's all speculation, so we'll just have to get our builds into Abattoir and see what happens. If you're playing Bone Spear, which variant will you be bringing to Abattoir of Zir? And to extend on this question, what do you feel will be the best Necromancer build going into Abattoir of Zir? Leave your comments below and let's discuss it. I also want to point people in the direction of another build made by my brother-in-arms, Sirke. It is a Sever Shadow build that is putting in the work for T100s. So if you like new ideas for builds, the link for the video and the Reddit post will be in the description below. If you like the video, make sure to subscribe and be notified on any new content. I'll be releasing much more content now that I actually have a set schedule, so keep your eyes peeled. OperatorOtter,